What attracts a person to organized crime? Gangsters are members of criminal organizations known for their illegal activities, particularly drug smuggling, gambling, bootlegging, and assassinations. For decades, these groups have been active in several countries, most notably in Europe, Asia, the US, and Latin America. Most of these gangsters became infamous from the severity of their crimes, the amount of drugs they smuggled, the fortunes that they accumulated, and their ruthless, sometimes even high-profile killings. I'm Mike with List 25, and here's a list of the top 25 extremely notorious gangsters. 25. Jack Diamond. Irish-American gangster Jack Diamond, more commonly known as Gentleman Jack, was a bootlegger whose operations were largely focused in Philadelphia. He was a close friend of another notorious gangster and gambler, Arnold Rothstein. As he oversaw bootleg alcohol sales in Lower Manhattan, Diamond had a conflict with Dutch Schultz and the other gangs of the city. He also got involved in a series of kidnappings in Manhattan, including that of James Duncan. He died after being shot by his enemies in his hideout in Albany, New York in 1931. 24. Tom Devaney. A mobster based in New York, Tom Devaney was the man behind the drift between mobster Mickey Spillane and the Genovese crime family in the 1960s and 70s. He also led the gang war against James Coonan, an Irish-American mobster and racketeer in Manhattan. George Barone, together with an alleged gunman named Joe Mad Dog Sullivan, murdered Tom Devaney in Midtown Manhattan in 1976 before murdering Spillane the following year. 23. James Coonan. An Irish-American mobster and racketeer who used to operate in Manhattan, James Jimmy C. Coonan became a gangster and organized his own powerful crew of criminals to avenge his father, who was kidnapped, beaten, and killed by another well-known mobster in the 1960s, Mickey Spillane. He was sentenced to 75 years in prison after he was proven guilty of murdering Harold Whitehead. 22. Dawood Ibrahim. The man behind the infamous Indian organized crime syndicate dubbed as D Company, Dawood Ibrahim currently heads a large, unlawful empire in India. He's believed to have masterminded, financed, and organized the 1993 Bombay bombings, a series of 13 explosions in Mumbai that left about 250 casualties in each attack. He used to have close links with the late Osama bin Laden of Al-Qaeda and is currently the most wanted man in India. 21. The Kray brothers. Reginald Reggie Kray and Ronald Ronnie Kray were twin brothers and English gangsters who orchestrated a series of organized crimes in East London. They were primarily involved in large-scale robberies, assaults, arson, protection rackets, as well as the murder of the notorious criminal Jack the Hat McVitie from London. Though they were among the most feared gangsters of their time, the twins became U.S. celebrities in the 60s with their willingness to share their stories in interviews, books, and movies. 20. Demetrius Flenory. Known as the Black Meech in several circles in Atlanta, Demetrius Flenory was among the two founders of the Black Mafia family, a large drug trafficking organization that predominantly operated in Detroit before expanding into Atlanta and Los Angeles. He was convicted of trafficking cocaine throughout the U.S. for nearly 2 decades, and was identified as among the highest-earning drug traffickers in the history of the country. He is currently serving a 30-year sentence for running a continuing criminal enterprise. 19. Joaquin Guzman. Mexican drug lord Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Loera led the Sinaloa cartel, an organized crime syndicate and drug trafficking group that used to operate in Mexico in the late 20th century. The cartel was also known then as the Guzman Loera Organization, named after its leader. He was one of the most powerful men of the world from about 2009 to 2016, when he was captured and extradited to the US. His approximate net worth in 2016 was roughly $4 billion, and at one point Forbes magazine labeled him as the, quote, most powerful drug trafficker in the world. 18. James Burke. Known as the Irishman, Irish-American gangster James Burke was the head of the Lucchese crime family in the 1970s and was accused of having been involved in the brutal murder of several people at the time. He's believed to have been the mastermind behind the Lufthansa heist, an extensive robbery that took place at the JFK airport in 1978, which earned him around $2 million.
17.
Vito Genovese. A gangster who reached the peak of his popularity during the Castellammarese War in the 1930s, Vito Genovese was an Italian-American mobster who headed the Genovese crime family. He was mentor to the successor of the leader of the crime family, Vincent Gigante. In 1931, he plotted to kill Salvatore Maranzano with the help of Lucky Luciano. Genovese moved to Italy and prospered as he led the black market operations of his gambling empire.
16.
Meyer Lansky. A Polish gangster who was known as the mob's accountant, Meyer Lansky was among the organized crime figures who developed the National Crime Syndicate in the US. He was among the most powerful and notorious gangsters of the 20th century, and played a big role in operating the Italian mafia. He developed and operated some of the largest gambling empires in the US and masterminded the formation of the criminal underworld.
15.
Jacques Mesrine. Known as the modern gangster of the modern French history, Jacques Mesrine was largely involved in several bank robberies, murders, kidnappings, and burglaries in the US, Canada, and France during the 20th century. He was also known as the Man with 1,000 Faces because of his aptitude for disguising himself for each of his operations. He was imprisoned several times, but was always able to escape, even killing the judges who sentenced him.
14.
James Whitey Bulger. A notorious gangster based in South Boston, James Whitey Bulger was a social bandit who operated much like Robin Hood. He dedicated his life to leading a prostitution racket, which he himself organized. Their purpose was to chase after and kill drug lords and illegal gamblers. At the time of his arrest in 2011 for his involvement in a conspiracy to commit identity fraud, Bulger was one of the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives.
13.
Anthony Accardo. Nicknamed Joe Batters, or Big Tuna, Anthony Accardo emerged from being a notorious hoodlum to being the head of the crime syndicate known as the Chicago Outfit. The Chicago mob increased in power during his tenure as he expanded its operations in several territories throughout the US.
12.
Bugsy Siegel. The founder of Murder Incorporated, Bugsy Siegel was an American mobster who headed the Genovese crime family. He was known as one of the most feared gangsters of his time because of his ruthlessness to his associates. In the 1940s, he controlled and financed some of the original casinos in Las Vegas, and was also a bootlegger. Siegel even assassinated his enemies, the Fabrizio brothers, and his rival loan sharks, the Amberg brothers.
11.
Carlo Gambino. A Sicilian mobster, Don Carlo Gambino was the head of the Gambino crime family, the most powerful family in Manhattan at the time. In 1957, he was also at the helm of the Commission of the American Mafia, an Italian-American criminal society that operated much like the Sicilian Mafia. He stood up against the Anastasia Loyalists in the 1960s and expanded his rackets to several parts of the US. He eventually controlled about 90% of the ports in New York, gaining millions in the process.
10.
John Dillinger. John Dillinger is considered one of the most notorious bank robbers in US history. He's said to have robbed nearly 25 banks and police stations and murdered several people throughout East Chicago and Indiana. He rose to popularity during the Depression era, executing jailbreaks and outrunning the FBI until 1934, when they ambushed him in a back alley after he saw a movie and shot him dead.
9.
Frank Costello. Known as the Prime Minister, Frank Costello was a crime boss and an Italian criminal who was also one of the most popular mob group leaders in the US, particularly in New York. He led the Lower East Side Gang of Manhattan while he worked for another notorious group, the Morello Gang. Costello, together with Lucky Luciano, became part of the Sicilian Mafia family and was involved in the operation of rum manufacturing.
8.
Arnold Rothstein. A businessman and a gambler, American gangster Arnold Rothstein was the organizer of corruption in professional athletics, particularly the fixing of the 1919 World Series. Dubbed as the Brain, Rothstein was also the father of one of the most infamous Jewish mobs in New York. He also established and operated a casino and was greatly involved in the smuggling practices along the Hudson River and the Great Lakes.
7.
Enoch Johnson. Known as the unequaled leader of the political machine that ruled the governments of Atlantic City and Atlantic County, Enoch Louis Johnson began to rise in power when he was elected as the new sheriff of the Atlantic County Republic Mexican Committee. He led a notorious organization involved in prostitution and gambling and was an advocate of the vice industry of the U.S.
6.
Lucky Luciano. An American mobster, Lucky Luciano was known as the father of modern organized crime in the U.S., as he was the one responsible for splitting the organization into 5 mafia families. Head of the Genovese crime family, Luciano also established the first commission in the United States, a governing body for organized crime. Today, he's known for starting the National Crime Syndicates of the United States.
5.
Billy the Kid. Also known as Henry Antrim, Billy the Kid was a gangster who committed his first murder at the age of 18. Antrim was a 19th century gunman who became involved in the Lincoln County War and was known for his unparalleled skill in handling firearms. Throughout his life, he killed nearly 30 people and stole several horses and cattle. First-hand sources say that Billy the Kid killed only those he thought deserved it.
4.
Al Capone. More commonly known as Scarface, due to the knife scar that ran across his left cheek, Al Capone was an American gangster who dedicated his life of crime to smuggling liquor and running gambling and prostitution rings in New York and Chicago. Inducted into his first gang at the age of 14, Capone slowly built his empire through violent and illegal means. He was finally charged with tax evasion and conspiracy to violate prohibition laws in 1931, resulting in an 11-year prison sentence, most of which was spent at Alcatraz until his release into retirement.
3.
Jesse James. Jesse Woodson James was the most famous member of the 19th century gang known as the James Younger Gang. James had been a Confederate guerrilla during the Civil War after his family's farm was attacked by Union soldiers. He and his cohorts went on to rob over 20 Union trains, stagecoaches, and banks. That all came to an end when James was shot and killed by 2 men out for the reward money offered by the governor of Missouri, who was looking to put a stop to the robberies.
2.
Griselda Blanco. Known as the cocaine godmother, Griselda Blanco is a pioneer of one of the biggest cocaine drug trades in Miami. She spent her childhood and adolescence as a pickpocket and prostitute. As an adult, she was indicted on federal drug conspiracy charges and spent 19 years in U.S. prisons. She was said to have moved over 300 kilos of cocaine a month and ordered the deaths of hundreds, though she was only indicted on 3 of these murders. Once released, she was deported to Colombia, where she lived out the remainder of her life. She was gunned down while shopping for meat in 2012 at the age of 69.
1.
Pablo Escobar. A Colombian drug lord, Pablo Escobar controlled several drug empires and murdered roughly 4,000 people in the 1980s and 90s. He led one of the most powerful and feared criminal organizations in history, accumulating billions of dollars and either bribing or using his gangs of soldiers and criminals to murder those who got in his way. While some of his money and power was put towards charitable causes, the crime rate in Colombia rose dramatically. In 1993, when the Colombian government discovered Escobar's hideout, the day after his 44th birthday, the notorious drug lord was shot and killed in the ensuing ambush.
Enjoying our lists? Be sure to click that subscribe button on the bottom right and the notification bell so you don't miss out on new ones every Monday through Friday. Share them with friends and help us consistently conciliate curiosity. And if you want even more lists, check out these videos here or just head to our website at list25.com.